Hi, this is Dr. Schaus, and today we're going to talk about habitat use and environmental stimuli. The key elements of habitat for any animal are food, which provides a source of energy and nutrients, water, shelter, and space in a suitable arrangement. For plants, we would substitute their source of energy, the sun, and the nutrients they need from the soil and the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. We're going to use the green sea turtle as an example today. So turtle grass beds are critical habitat for green sea turtles. You can see this one swimming along, kind of ignoring the snorkelers. It's actually munching on a blade of turtle grass, and you can see that on the right-hand side of its mouth there. But not just any turtle grass is going to be important. Take a look here at the lower right-hand corner. You can see how the grass is almost mown down to the sandy surface, and that's actually done by the green sea turtle. The new growth then is highly nutritious, it's not covered over with things, and sea turtles actually prefer these particular habitats because of the highly nutritious plant growth that's there. Sea turtles prefer these areas because they do not have epiphytes growing on them. Epiphytes are organisms that grow on plants. If you take a look at the left-hand picture, you'll see the blades of grass in the middle don't have anything growing on them. However, the rest of them are completely encrusted with that pink coral and red algae. And on the blades on the right-hand side, they have hydrozoans and some other organisms that are growing on top of them. So sea turtles prefer the blades of grass that aren't crusted over like this, and those new growths are actually highly nutritious. So you can see in these preferred areas, they'll munch the blades right down to the sand level and then move on to another patch of mown habitat. And they might keep 5 or 6 or more of these areas and move between these different feeding sites and then munch down the new growth as it appears. So the key elements of habitat for the sea turtle are the turtle grass beds, especially the mown patches that they revisit. They actually drink seawater and they can excrete the salts in their tears, so they keep the freshwater portion, but will get rid of the salt. So that's less of an issue for them in finding it's all around them. They use shelter in the coral reefs, might hide between some coral heads. They have to be close to the surface so they can come to the surface and breathe every 30 minutes or so, but they'll seek protection from predators in these hidden areas, especially when they're resting. And then they need space in a suitable arrangement, so they need to be able to move between the different mown patches, they need to have a sheltered area, and ultimately they'll need to find a sandy beach that's protected where they can breed. So organisms respond to specific environmental stimuli in order to find these key components of habitat, to locate food, to find water, to locate shelter, and then to move between different critical spaces such as nesting areas and the breeding grounds. This particular red-lored parrot was actually enticed to come a little bit closer by placing food out at a feeding station. So this one was using visual cues in order to find food. But what are some other important environmental stimuli that birds might use to find their way around? For many birds, especially migratory birds, they will use visual stimuli, so visual landmarks, specific key features along the migratory route that they use to orient themselves. They also use a sun compass. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and so they can use these cues, either the polarizing of light at twilight or the location of where the sun is rising, to help orient themselves and determine which direction is north. Some birds migrate at nighttime, and they actually use a star compass. They will know the shapes of the constellations and where they are at certain times of night, and actually can use those, have demonstrated to use those in order to orient themselves and migrate in the right direction. Some birds even use geomagnetism. They will cue in on the Earth's magnetic field and actually sense it and use it to help orient themselves. And some birds have even been shown to use odors to navigate their way to specific habitats. Let's look a little closer at the magnetic compass, because this is a sense that we don't have. We can't just sense the Earth's magnetic field, but birds can. Many birds can. So an example is this study by Keaton in the early 1970s that first described how birds, in this case a homing pigeon, was able to navigate using a magnetic compass. And so they attached a magnet to some of the birds, and others they had a brass plate as a control. It would weigh about the same as a magnet, but it would not emit the magnetic field. On sunny days, both sets of birds were able to find their way in the proper direction with no problem, because the sun provided the cue that let them know what direction was north or what direction was south. However, on overcast days, birds that had the magnet attached to them were unable to orient themselves. They didn't have the cue of the sun because it was overcast, and also the magnet disrupted their sensation of the Earth's magnetic field, so they were unable to sense the Earth's magnetic field, and thus they were unable to orient themselves in that particular way. So this provides some evidence, and other studies have followed up on this to provide additional details. Now, one of the long-distance migrants is the red knot, a very, very small shorebird, about the size of your hand or a fist. And it's still able to migrate from far northern Arctic latitudes, in some cases as far as southern Argentina. So let's take a look at the subspecies rufa that lives along the east coast of the United States. It's going to migrate very, very long distances from the Arctic tundra down to the south end of South America. And it actually uses a key stopover point along that migration route. For all of these species, except for subspecies, except for Icelandica, you're going to see two sets of arrows. And the space in between indicates key stopover places on migration. For subspecies rufa, this occurs in the Delaware Bay, and they will actually time their migration in order to take advantage of breeding horseshoe crabs. They'll gorge themselves on the eggs of these horseshoe crabs, and that'll allow them to put on weight, take on energy, to allow them to complete the rest of their migration out over the Atlantic Ocean and then down to the northern end of South America, and then continue on to the southern end of South America. Another less dramatic example of bird migration is the migration pattern of the resplendent quetzal found in Costa Rica. Its breeding range is shown in the dark stippled area where it breeds in Monteverde Reserve from March until June. From this point, they migrate down the Pacific slope to the areas denoted by the squares, so they're at a lower elevation. This is during the wet season, and so they take advantage of the resources that are available in the normally dry areas during the wet season. From there, they migrate over to the Atlantic slope during the dry season, November through January and into February, because the Atlantic slope is more moist year-round as opposed to the Pacific slope. So by doing this circular migration, they basically move from the desired breeding habitat to areas where resources are going to be available in short availability during the wet season to a less dramatically dry area during the dry season, November through January. Because these places are in close proximity to each other, this fits our definition of space in a suitable arrangement. The quetzal bird needs all of these different spaces, but at different times of year, and any deforestation between these areas could potentially disrupt their migration corridors. For more information on green sea turtle habitat and bird migration, follow the links here. Thanks.